Welcome to today's New England Himss webinar, Experience-Driven Security, presented by Praveen Raghraman, Senior Director, Product Management and Access Security, and Christian Boucher, Chief Healthcare Strategist, both with premier sponsor Citrix. All lines have been muted upon entry today. Please send all your questions via the Q&A. Praveen is the Senior Director of Product Management in the Access Security team. He brings a rich set of product and technology experience in network security, remote access, security analytics, monitoring, and network management. Christian is the Chief Healthcare Strategist for Citrix, serving as a subject matter expert, spokesperson, and brand ambassador to provide strategy, best practices, and trends to elevate awareness and differentiate Citrix in the healthcare market. Please join me in welcoming Praveen and Christian today.
Good morning, Praveen. I know you're on the West Coast, so thanks for getting up early and having this conversation with us today.
Good morning, Christian. Good morning, everyone.
And thank you for the intro. So today, we want to discuss a little bit about how security is driving change within healthcare, and not just healthcare, but around the world. But being the healthcare strategist and evangelist for Citrix, I figured it'd be a good place to focus on today. One of the challenges we have is overlaying security onto any engagement. So going back, 25 years with Citrix as a customer, it's always been something that I used as a tool to deliver improved experiences on the security side, as well as delivering workspaces across our vast organizations. One of the few things that I do on a regular basis, and I say it's a charter of my overall role at Citrix, is engaging with customers across the globe. As you can see, we've had significant roles in a lot of the way healthcare delivers both applications and data and networking across the board. But overall, our scope has been changed significantly over the last few years, where security has become paramount in what IT is looking for, especially in the aspects of simplifying that. So in my travels, I probably speak with 10 to 15 customers per week, trying to understand those major challenges, and then again evangelizing those thoughts and concepts back into our product teams to better build solutions that meet the requirements and meet more so we'll call it one of the core pillars of the quadruple aim, and that's simplifying user experience across the board. So when we're talking a lot about some of the concepts we are today, be assured that a lot of these have been shared and pulled in from our many customers who are giving us feedback on a daily basis about things that we can improve and things that we can do to make their overall life easier. A few of the top trends that we've been having more discussions on recently, of course, remote work and how that is impacting not only your infrastructure and the way that you deliver those solutions out to the field, but more so on how that security dynamic has changed in regards to how you deliver those and what are your major concerns while building out these solutions to again deliver the security dynamics that are required by your organization. And I know they all change and depending upon several different facets of how your organization looks at security in general. It could be one or two on the scale of importance. One has always been for me, clinician experience, being married to a nurse and being in healthcare for so long. I understand the impact that technology can have on the overall clinician experience, and then making its way down to patient experience. So all those three topics have been top of mind for many of the customers that I've been speaking with, and also many of my peers across the industry within the IT realm, whether it's the big hyperscalers or even some of our smaller partners that work directly with some of the core ISVs within healthcare, whether it's Epic, Cerner, or the like. So as we get through and talk about some of these things, I'm going to pass over to Praveen to talk a little bit more about some of the things that he's seeing on the product side and how he sees them maturing in every organization's IT infrastructure.
Thank you, Christian. Hello, everyone. So I think the whole idea about what you touched upon, Christian, is very important around how we deliver these experiences. And what we find out is that from a technology perspective, a lot of IT professionals, particularly healthcare, is no exception. Have to kind of deal with these three major areas of focus. I would say that we kind of see a trend on. The first is around the complexity of these applications, and in particularly in healthcare. As we know, a lot of organizations grow through acquisitions. They actually have legacy as well as newer applications. So what we actually see is these applications are in the hundreds, and a typical employee takes up to have access to multiple apps. So security becomes very important. Now, what we did was we actually asked security professionals in a survey, and overwhelming majority of security practitioners actually came back and said, you know what, that the volume of security threats in this hybrid experience becomes really critical for us to have to manage and maintain. And what only that actually leads to these suboptimal experiences, where we as Citrix have been at the forefront of ensuring that it's not just about delivering secure experiences, but also being able to do them in a manner that balance the overall experience, whether it is a clinician experience, whether it's the patient experience, and ultimately even IT administration itself needs to be easy and simple. So with that, if you look at that overall the overall gamut of things, it's pretty clear that we have to reinvent the way we look at security, and not just be about enforcement, but it has to be something that is empathetic to these experiences. So if we go to the next slide, what we'll notice is that complexity, and if you could just go to the build, Christian, actually manifests in how work gets done. But not only that, also how infrastructure really needs to be protected. And when you put together this whole mishmash of how different clinicians and practitioners as well as patients experience access to different applications, it really becomes important that you rethink your strategy, and particularly in a manner where the applications can be delivered through the cloud, or they can be on premises, or they can be in hybrid deployments. And that's where the whole idea of choice becomes important. If you go to the next slide, what we look at is that this manifests into the whole idea of frictionless experience and choice. And that is what we define as holistic security. Security that is something that provides the right level of friction when it's appropriate. Sometimes it's two-factor, sometimes it's the ability to add more checks. Sometimes it's about actually making sure that some data that is actually extremely important and sensitive does not leave in any case, because there might be potential threats of that nature. And that frictionless experience, that when we take it up along with a more broader approach, that's where we start looking at this idea of zero trust. So you just go through the build, Christian. So let's get back to that item that we were talking about. And Christian, I'm going to pause here and maybe get your view here, particularly from as we were discussing earlier around this experiences that are important. I want to talk a little bit more about the security landscape further, but I'm going to pause here and kind of pass it to you on maybe some commentary on how this is actually manifesting in the healthcare space.
Well, and it's again multifaceted. There are so many different workflows within healthcare. I mean, you go into any hospital floor, and depending upon the unit, different clinicians require different technologies. Their workflows are totally different from what the nursing unit down the hall has. So how do you build out solutions that need to be fluid while still maintaining that level of security has been a paradigm that we've been fighting for. I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years, and it never seems to get simpler. But something as simple as allowing your clinicians to access applications with single sign-on across the entire portfolio of apps, whether they're sitting in your data center, whether they're in some cloud facility that you have expanded to, or you're adopting SaaS applications. We all understand that most healthcare organizations rely on a primary EHR for documentation and workflow design, but oftentimes many other applications play a role in that, whether it's only once a day or maybe it's several times an hour. Those pauses in productivity and the pauses in being able to do the things that are required by a clinician to make sure that the patient is receiving the best care possible sometimes can be interrupted by technology that may not be fitting well into the workflow. So how do you do that? How do you look across the entire organization and identify all those different deltas in workflows? I've built out solutions for an entire oncology program where every single physician wanted to work a little bit differently. So how do you do that, giving them the flexibility to work as they work best, but at the same time, staying within your infrastructure designs, core infrastructure designs, and layering on security that's not putting up roadblocks for clinicians. That's the biggest thing I hear is, while we can always improve workflows within clinical applications, those things oftentimes takes a bit of time, both internally and with your partners. But, being able to lower the barriers between the clinician and the patient are paramount. And a lot of times technology can help that if it's done the correct way.
No, very well stated. And I think I'm glad you brought up this idea of essentially, the different workflows, because that is very consistent with, as I was saying, how the security landscape itself is evolving in the healthcare side. So again, by an overwhelming majority, security practitioners said hybrid work, and I want to be very sort of particular about this, because I think hybrid has something completely changed the way most organizations are working, particularly in healthcare. The systems, the processes, and the controls and the workflows that you're talking about, Christian, are the ones that are posing challenges in how we make the right security decisions. So if you go to the next slide, that's where we believe that we have to kind of take that next deeper dive in seeing what are the kind of threats, what are these different kinds of situations that particularly from the CISO organization or from others who are in the IT practice have to look at. And security is a collective responsibility, as you would imagine, right? But if you look at this gamut, we hear our customers, and particularly some of the largest healthcare providers, and even the smaller, hospitals, tell us about potential employee, access to applications that may pose a risk from a trusted SaaS apps, right? SaaS is actually becoming prevalent. Cloud is becoming prevalent. I know a lot of organizations are on this journey, but nevertheless, they're taking that step. We also have issues where you might have potential malware that might get infected inadvertently, or there might be cases where a device is not patched, and we know that the myriad number of devices that pervade the whole space of healthcare IT. So bottom line is that these are the kind of threat scenarios that we have actually been looking at very closely as part of our team here in Citrix, and we've been working at that. The good news is that security and secure access are not new for Citrix. We've been doing this for decades. What is new essentially in this space is how it's evolving and manifesting in terms of the evolving set of new applications that are coming in. So that's where it's important to recognize that we have to look at the evolving approaches, and that's where zero trust comes in. Now, zero trust, again, it's not a buzzword. It has gained a lot of notoriety over the last several years, but we can tell you that at Citrix, as technologists and people who are working from a product perspective, we take this idea that zero trust is a holistic approach. Let's meet the customer in their journey by, first thing is enabling this whole idea of identity. So identity-based access, identity-aware access, and context becomes extremely important. Is a clinician trying to get to an application in a specific situation that they need to get access to? Then you talked about single sign-on. How do we make that happen while keeping the access still contextually risk appropriate? Also, the idea of monitoring systems is extremely important. So observability becomes important, kind of taking these input from different components and then weaving that into an easy policy expression that we can roll out. So that is what zero trust is at a foundational level. And we can kind of look at, how would this make sense now, for example, in how we put this in practice for not only delivering secured experiences, but also the, that clinician experience and the patient experience you were talking about, Christian.
Exactly. And what I do like is the contextually appropriate, approach, because there are times in where clinicians may need to work from home. Again, my wife is a hospice nurse, so she's on the road all the time, and she's accessing various systems at different times of the days, and being able to understand the various workflows and appropriately apply security and or access to those solutions is becoming more important. As we've seen a big boom in telehealth. It's starting to slow down a little bit more, but as the policies catch up with the technology and the needs by our patients and the community in general, technology is going to play a bigger role in how care is delivered. I think we've seen that expand greatly over the course of the last couple of years, but overall, it's the concept that just because you have access doesn't necessarily mean you need access at this point. And how do we control that cross-contamination, whether it's a BYO program or it's a remote work program, or it's, again, you're a member of your staff accessing something from a shared Wi-Fi connection. All those things play into the larger picture of how and when security measures should be applied.
No, absolutely. And I think what the other important element there is security well done actually leads to better experiences that are simpler and easier for people to not only implement, but be able to troubleshoot and find if there's a potential area where you might want improvements to be done. So I think that's our approach. And so let's look at how do we put the zero trust approach actually in practice. And so just kind of from Citrix perspective, we have been a leader in the space of delivering remote access with our virtualized technologies. And it's no secret that this is something that many of the largest healthcare organizations in the world have come to trust. And they've really done that in a manner that expands their gamut of use cases. So whether it is remote PC, whether it is basically providing that remote desktop session on demand for a clinician to get to their Epic application or other kinds of healthcare applications, whether it is basically, accessing, for example, as you said, maybe an internal billing system that might be, web-based application, or even, for things like desktops that maybe need to be provisioned. All of these use cases are really covered well. And the most important thing is that it's not one specific one size fits all. It's about being able to manage remote as well as hybrid, as well as on-prem and cloud experience is under one umbrella. So that's something that Citrix has done really well for many years. And if you actually kind of expand that, where we're going, as I was talking about, in the realm of zero trust security, is this new technology that we've been working on, which is called as secure private access. Now, basically, let's look at that whole idea of zero trust and least privilege model and say, let's use the right technology for the right method. So secure private access enables a fully cloud delivered solution, and it meets the customer where they are in their journey. So things like, being able to give you the right level of access to different workers and employees, being able to enforce controls where some sensitive data should not be copied because there are compliance requirements. Single sign-on becomes extremely important. I think I can't emphasize, to your point, Christian, on how important that is in that overall experience end users really demand. And let's face it, if you don't have visibility and monitoring, then you cannot measure and adjust the policies. So being able to provide that entire sequence of visibility across the platform and different applications, user traffic, really becomes critical. So again, kind of rounding out this portfolio of capabilities that Citrix has on the virtualized side with the virtual apps and desktops, as well as for all the other native applications like web, like SaaS, and a lot of other legacy TCP applications, we can enable that with secure private access.
And I think that one of the biggest pieces that I think rings to CIOs and especially any of the security professionals, the CISOs in the organizations, is the visibility and monitoring. And not only just to know and respond 2 days later, but being able to adaptively understand what's going on and build out essentially user profiles for each individual as they're consuming your resources. So not only is it giving you real-time data on what the threats could possibly be, but you're also building out I would say almost templates of how user populations are consuming your resources. So you are much more capable of identifying anomalies as they pop up and then again, associating the appropriate actions with them in real time if things fall outside of the norm.
Got it. And if we just check if there is any questions, or we may be able to obviously take them towards the end as the case may be.
So there is a question that says, there was a statement just saying, Christian, thank you and thank your wife for being a hospice nurse. I had the privilege of working on the Medicare demonstration for hospice and cared for both parents through hospice. Incredible organization. Interesting presentation on how the hybrid world has changed the issues you face protecting data. But the question is, how do organizations balance the need for enhanced security programs in improving clinician experience?
Well, that's a very touchy subject. I see, most organizations have these priorities, and I would say, whether the top 3, top 4, top 2, across every single organization I speak with. The challenge becomes not only not trying to interrupt the workflows that are happening now, not trying to add one more gate or one more password or one more authentication method to the environments, but also, how does that impact our IT staff? One thing that we have seen, and I didn't add it to this, but as a trend, is technology rationalization. How are all, if I am a security department, and I'll just use an example of someone I just spoke with last week who has 10 people within it for an organization that probably supports I don't know, maybe 50, 60,000 clinicians. How do you keep that security program running optimally when you have that limited amount of resources, both FTE wise and budgetary wise? So I think if you can find ways to bring in, again, Praveen mentioned it earlier, it's health security is holistic across the entire organization, but the kind of the buck stops at IT and how you can enable your teams to deliver the appropriate security at the real time. So finding solutions, and I don't want to plug Citrix too much, but that can take a lot of those pieces and bring them together in one user interface for, where previously we've talked to customers who have 4 or 5 products that do some of the things that we do. Now they have to manage all those. Now they have to correlate the data. Now they have to then make sure it's a false positive, and then they can react. Trying to find ways or identifying solutions that can bridge a lot of those gaps that your organization's IT security team may have can help simplify that. But as always, it's about looking back and making sure that you're not adding another flight of stairs for these nurses to climb before they can do the things that they were there to. I can this is a funny story, but it sticks to me to this day. I can remember when we first put our EHR, and this is going back almost 20 years ago, for a hospice and home care team that we merged a couple of organizations together and built out this new program. And they went, we had done training for 6-8 months, did hardware training, all the technology. And on the day that we went live, we had 5 nurses turn in their laptops and their badges because their thought process was, this was just making it more difficult for me to do my job. So I always keep that picture in my mind about, are we, and I guess it's the physician's creed, do no harm. How do we do no harm in healthcare IT when our job is to protect everything, but at the same time, we still are responsible overall for the patient? I think it's a tough balancing act, but I think being able to be mindful of how your your organization's clinicians need to work and across the spectrum of how they're working, but also partnering with the right technology to help you solve some of these problems, in I would say a much more controlled manner makes life a little bit easier for IT executives.
Yeah, and Christian, I actually want to kind of add to that, which is there are real constructs, obviously, kind of not going too much into the product itself, but capabilities that enable the balancing act that security and IT practitioners have to do. So having the right tools and having these, comprehensive capabilities is extremely important. So kind of want to bring that discussion, taking it along with this idea that, when you're really looking at security and when you're looking at different kinds of user experiences, the browser becomes one of the key areas of a threat vector. And again, being a technologist, it's extremely important that we look at all aspects of how we want to secure and deliver that patient experience, right from the point someone's trying to log in and get to the application. And, it kind of goes through all these hops in between. So this is where Citrix has actually been a leader and innovator in the space with the new Citrix Enterprise browser. Now, this is an evolution of what we've been doing over the years with our workspace receiver and the workspace app. But the main thing I really want to mention is that with the proliferation of these web applications, it's important that not only do you control what people can or cannot do at different layers, but it's important that we manifest that through a policy even at the rendering layer, at the experience layer. And that's where the enterprise browser really becomes important. Now, of course, it's a very familiar interface. Just think of it as running Chromium as the engine in the background. And what it does is it gives you that same Chrome-like experience, but that security layer on top. So, we know as security people, we put a firewall if we have to block somebody from getting inside the network. We have, tools that allow you to, authenticate. There are tools to do single sign-on. Well, this is yet another control in that access change, but right at the rendering layer. So if you go to the next slide, I know you mentioned something about this idea that you were touching upon, that unified access experience. So this is where it's important that you look at everything that an employee or a clinician really needs to go through. First, making sure that they don't have to enter their password 5 times. That nurse's story, so true. I mean, that is exactly what a lot of our customers tell us, that they have to go through that trouble if the implementation and the right tools are not available. So don't prompt me again and again as an end user with annoying passwords. I want to be single signed on, enable that trust relationship. Second, give me all my applications that I need to do my work and essentially focus on patient care and that experience in one place. Right? Whether it is a desktop, whether it is, access to a billing system, or even whether it is access to some important data and files that have health records, all of them in one place. And that's what, the experience that we have basically envisioned with our workspace. Now, one thing you would notice is that all of this is made possible because of the fact that we know, based on that zero trust model, what is the right application that an end user really needs. And this is where IT can come in and use their policy builders to actually deliver these experience through the appropriate configuration tools.
And just to add on that, I think what that really means is that just because, again, a certain person within your organization has access to certain files or applications when they're sitting on your network or within the 4 walls of any of your buildings, does not necessarily mean that you want that when they are working from home. Or maybe you do. The granular controls that are available within our solution give you the ability to determine what is the appropriate risk factor for your organization. But even some things as simple as, being able to not allow the screen to be shared or stop copying and pasting between applications. Those things are all granular. So you may have full control of what you can do within those applications when you're within your predetermined policy. But when they fall out of that, you can layer on these things without any additional interaction by the end user to ramp up your security posture on any given device, regardless if it's a BYO device or it's, their kid's laptop who they're trying to jump onto at a airport Wi-Fi.
No, very well stated. And if you really look at that whole idea of delivering policy, what becomes important is, to your point, determining what is the posture of the device. So we look at who the user is, right? What role they play. Are they essentially someone who needs elevated privileges, or are they somebody who is actually probably requiring access to specific applications? That is the fundamental. The identity level becomes a fundamental determinant. Then we add other layers of context. Is this device trusted? Is it a corporate managed asset owned by the hospital, or is this something that a clinician or somebody in patient care is bringing as their own device because they have to work odd hours, and the urgency of delivering that care becomes extremely important. So BYO versus corporate asset becomes an important thing. But then we can go even further and be able to say, well, let's make sure that we know that this device is compliant with corporate policies. Is this device actually fully up to date on things like XDR checks? Does it have the right level of patches and what have you? And in other cases where you might even want to know whether the device is actually something that has the latest OS updates. All these things become important. And then you can layer in particularly things like other capabilities that allow you to get that full context of what application is and what is risk appropriate. So we go to the next slide, Christian. Kind of want to expand on this concept a little bit more, on this whole idea that how are we bringing this together into the overall healthcare IT. And what's important here is that these experiences that we're trying to deliver not only affect one particular segment, but they are actually something that can be broadly used to deliver end-to-end patient experience. So I'll turn it back to you at this, Christian, and kind of walk us through whatever we learned about the technical capabilities and the technology, as well as the core use cases that we're talking about, how that would apply across maybe a couple of examples that we have here on this from a healthcare perspective.
Well, and thanks, Praveen. It's always great to hear you get a little bit into the weeds on all the stuff that you're working on. But what the challenges are, and we know what they were the last 3 years, and next year will be something completely different, hopefully a lot different than what we've had to deal with the last couple of years. But what we do know is that the healthcare in its larger format is changing, whether it's population health or reaching more out to the communities, being able to extend services, affiliates, or building out partnerships across the board. How are you looking at the way that you're delivering the solutions that are required to meet all those mandates? Well, one of the biggest pieces I've seen is understanding that next week, and I always say this, the organization I used to work for was a high merger and acquisition. So we were always merging with somebody. We were building up affiliate programs. We were doing all this stuff, but oftentimes IT was at a disadvantage because we didn't know about those things until the CIO called me up 10 o'clock at night on a Friday, leaving a board meeting and saying, Christian, just so you know, we just brought on a new practice of name your number of physicians, and we need to get them up and running in 30 days, or the contract is void. How do you become nimble at the same time building out these partnerships and still, again, layering on the security? So whether it's augmenting your current staffing, we've seen a lot of that. Whether you're building partnerships with other organizations for specific specialty programs, access to the core solutions that you are delivering is important across the board, and how they're consuming those is always changing as well. I mean, do you own the devices that your affiliate programs are accessing your systems for, your referral practitioners? You may not in most cases. So how do you extend those same resources and still encapsulate that in a environment that will continue your security program even once you extending those services out to non-employee physicians, for example. Whether it's, building out your IT help desk or offshoring different departments of your team, all of these are requirements that meet I would say that the challenges of what IT is facing now. So across the board, there are various use cases that are expanding every day. But I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing is that organizations want to be more nimble. They want to be able to scale in real time if they need to. They want to be able to, again, take their security programs and make sure they're enforced, regardless how those solutions are being deployed out and who they're being deployed out to. So at the end of the day, you're still responsible for all those things, and finding a solution that can help tick 3 or 4 of those boxes off is as IT leader, I think it would be important.
Yeah, and I want to add to one thing that you just mentioned here, which is the different kinds of experience that need to be delivered. So the good news is that not only is the context in which the access is administered or provided is important, but also we have to be mindful that you have to reduce the barriers of friction when they're unnecessary, and that's so critical, particularly in healthcare where every minute matters, and every that additional friction not necessary that comes in the way of delivering excellent patient experiences and care becomes critical. So one of the things that we are able to actually do well is part of Citrix is that we can look at, well, when do we want the particular a doctor or a clinician or a nurse, or particularly even some other frontline workers, when they are trying to access applications, when do we really want them to be able to not do copy paste of data because it's considered not required in that particular context? Or when do we make sure that if you are fully in a trusted zone, then don't introduce those security controls unnecessarily? So security is not binary, and that's why I think having an empathy towards the persona, having an empathy towards the processes and workflows that they're trying to do, and then being able to express them in the appropriate policy constructs, which is kind of going back to that zero trust model I was talking about, is foundationally how Citrix is approaching zero trust security, and particularly zero trust security in the healthcare context. And that's what you see as examples here.
Yeah, and I would just like to add just some of the basic things that we often don't talk about with just deploying an application through the Citrix workspace or through the enterprise browser, like disabling key logging automatically for any of the applications that are presented to that, whether they're SaaS-based apps or they're locally installed apps, or even now extending into actually device-loaded applications if they're presented properly through the Citrix environment. So, all these little pieces of security solutions that are embedded into our solution, there's a million different use cases. We can talk about them, but all the different aspects really give organizations a toolbox full of things to utilize to meet the requirements of whatever that device and user require at that point.
Yeah, and to add to one more thing, there are best practices that I think particularly I'm sure you would kind of attest to, that Citrix has developed over the years, whether through our trusted other affiliates as well as partners and people like you in the organization who can help our customers and others in this business to say, how do you actually take this tool chest which has all these capabilities and actually put that in a manner that allows you to take this along as a journey. So I think with that, maybe we should take some more questions if there are any, Christian.
Sounds good.
So the next question is, are you seeing a correlation between clinician burnout and technology? And if so, how does Citrix participate in solving this problem?
Well, absolutely. I'm sure, we've all read a lot of the reports about burnout, especially on the clinician side within healthcare. Limited staffing, additional responsibilities. There are a lot of factors in, overall in physician, and I'll speak specifically for the nurse in the house. But technology plays a role in something as simple as what we talked about with single sign-on, and how that would alleviate many friction-based interactions across all the applications. Not only, you tie that with timeouts of applications. So even though they've authenticated into the secondary application 20 minutes ago, now they have to relog in because of timeouts put on by security policy. So, technology from a system level can assist a lot of that, especially when you start looking at the personas like Praveen mentioned. How do they work? How does security need to be deployed in this in this scenario? If a nurse is walking around with their own tablet, do we have to still apply all these exact policies? If it's a shared device, do we have to ramp them up? If it's a device that roams between buildings, what additionally do we have to put on? The granular controls, not only of the user and the applications, but more so the entire persona of that user, can help simplify a lot of that. And I think the other piece really is just, and I think we have a slide, I'm not sure we put it in here, but there was a big study that we kind of focused on about a year ago about just the amount of time users are bouncing between applications or looking for the right piece of data to do their job, whether it's reviewing systems or documents. If you can find a way to deliver everything into one specific user portal that's customized to that user just by default, it makes life a lot easier. So it's a lot of things that we do well. A lot of organizations that I talk with regularly implement a lot of the different things that we've talked about today to simplify that workflow, and also give them that ability to flex when needed, because there are always scenarios that pop up in workflows or just in the world that make you readjust. Now, it's a lot easier to change a console that applies to every single user in real time than it is to have to redeploy out a patch or a configuration that may not hit everyone until their next reboot or their next synchronization. With what we do, we can, in real time deploy added security or remove security and impact the users immediately. Praveen, you have anything? I know that we've talked a lot about just, how Citrix can simplify some of the things from the user interaction part, but, what has been the focus on our product and engineering teams to simplify that we'll call it the admin administration of the systems?
Oh, great question, Christian. I think the admin experience is important, very critical, particularly because you the example that you gave where IT staff is so limited, and I have not heard the last time I checked any more increases in budgets. So this is something that constantly, organizations have to deal with as a challenge. But where we are putting our focus is really on, multiple things. So one of them is when you're trying to implement a solution that requires you to understand what are the appropriate policies to be put in. It's important right from the get-go to know which applications are actually being used. What are those experiences that end users are actually trying to get to? Whether it is, an internal billing system, whether it is, some form of a desktop, what have you. So we have built tools that allow you to, right at the get-go, understand which application should be, brought under the gamut of zero trust, if you will, right? And the second thing that's critical here is that the onboarding workflows. So one common challenge we hear, particularly in healthcare, and I've been on many of these recent discovery calls with our customers over the last year or so, is when you have an M&A situation where hospitals are trying to grow and they have another hospital that they're trying to work with, how do you onboard the employees? There, the ability to merge different kind of identity systems and make that experience around defining the authentication policies becomes critical. That is all admin experience, right? The more complexity you add in, you're not going to be able to meet that 30-day challenge, if you will, that your CISO and your CIO are going to throw at you, saying, hey, we got to not only get all our systems integrated, but we have to make sure users are happy and productive. So there are specific constructs in the product that allow us in our technology set to understand what are the right applications, what are the right tools we need, and then how do we actually appropriately create an onboarding workflow, both for the solution as well as for the employee experience. And third component to this is the ongoing monitoring, so that you can essentially say, well, that's all great. That's how we started a month or two back. Now, as things are evolving and as end users are accessing these applications, what does that experience look like? How can we monitor to see what that patient experience actually is going to translate into something that, manifests as, maybe a slow response time, or the number of times they are running into failures, and then adjust policies. So that feedback loop becomes very critical. So we have in the administrative console ability to monitor that. And particularly I would emphasize things like Citrix Analytics, which has both the performance angle as well as the security angle that we can bring together. So I would say broadly, that is, how we are helping the admin experience.
Excellent.
So we have another question that says, what concerns and roadblocks do healthcare organizations raise when it comes to implementing security enhancements?
Security enhancements?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, we all know it's the end users. I think that has always been the challenge while implementing anything. I have this saying that I kind of leaned on until, physicians and nurses hate change unless it helps them. So we've got to be able to understand that our role is, again, to do no harm. How can we implement new security programs that reflect our organization's policies appropriately, but at the same time, how can we implement them in a way that does little to no change, and optimally we're saving them? Like something as simple as single sign-on, where you are now enforcing these highly complex passwords that would take years to break, but you're enabling it through a system that simplifies the process to all your various applications. Now, I understand there's limitations. Some solutions don't offer super complex passwords, but the ability to take, and I guess the biggest piece is to look at what the problem you're trying to solve. And if it's just simply layering on security, I think you need to expand your view a tad bit more to understand what specific concerns you have regarding that process. But you need to identify what you're trying to solve for the end user, and make sure that you are solving that first, and then add the solutions on top of that. I've always been kind of that, focus on the end user, even before I would, and I'm going back a long time, before I was a healthcare guy. The challenge was always defining what the problem is, and then working with the people, the groups within the organization that are focusing on that, and then building a solution that solves the problem with minimal impact. It's kind of a double-edged sword. And I think that's been the biggest question I have is, the balance between security and experience. And some people have one as 1A and 1B, and you go to the next organization, it's flipped over. But if you focus on, what the end user is going to experience, or the benefits you can bring by bringing that program in, oftentimes it helps out a lot. And I think, again, one of the biggest things we can do is just the simplest single sign-on across the board for them. I would do audits when we first implemented our security, and this is another funny story, I'll tell both, but we would do audits. I owned security for a long time, and something is, we made people put passwords in that were over 5 characters, and they all had them. Every nurse username and every user password was stickied underneath the keyboards. We implemented Imprivata and allowed proximity access to, and then at the tap it, they could just be close to the device and it would authenticate them in. But to save the extra 5 seconds, nurses were taking their badges and leaving them on the badge tap so they never log them out. So while you can't always be exactly replicating the process, you have to understand all the ways that people will find ways to break your process if it's not as simple as possible.
I don't have any more questions in the chat. Oh, another one just came in. I apologize. When an organization moves to a cloud infrastructure, how does it affect its vulnerability?
Praveen, you want to start with that one?
Yeah. Can you repeat the last part of the question? The cloud part? Sorry.
Sure. It says, when an organization moves to a cloud infrastructure, how does it affect its vulnerability?
Got it. No, I think great question. So I think a lot of cases when you move your applications or your workloads to the cloud, there is this real concern on how do you actually control, so to speak, the same resources, the same applications, because now you are not necessarily hosting them in your environment, you're not protecting them that directly. So I think the biggest focus here should be on going back to that point that I think Christian was making, is what access do you need? Least privilege access really needs to become a foundational area of determining how people may, hackers, others may exploit these vulnerabilities. So first thing is, let's face it, there's always new threats that are emerging. So you have to put in a series of defense in-depth strategies. One that involves, checks, contextual checks, ensuring that you have very thorough, detailed logging and monitoring, auditing for every piece of access that happens, whether it is through a person or a machine or other at different times of the day or different times of the day or week, as it matters. And then implementing essentially the least privilege model by saying, if someone doesn't need access, if an application is not part of their role or their job description, let's make sure we don't give that access to them. So the way you really have to think about applications in the cloud is really not that different. The main difference is that you have to put in more processes and measures and controls in place and make them contextual. I would say that is probably one of the best ways organizations can put a defense in-depth strategy that's not putting them in the back foot, but allowing them to be proactive about managing if a vulnerability were to show up.
And I agree. I think that the biggest thing is, I don't think it's so much, we're implementing more, we're just implementing different strategies. And I think north-south, when we talk about vulnerabilities within cloud are fairly similar to what you have on-prem. What I've always been worried about on the security side was the east-west traffic within my organization. So how are we segmenting? How are we doing the micro segmentation of these environments that stop someone from, again, compromising a device that sits on your network and then gets to the cloud? Or how do we, so understanding that, I look at the cloud as just another data center for me. I mean, we had multiple data centers. They were connected via different things. Even though it was private, there are many ways that you can take cloud and turn it essentially into just another private data center. Part of that is understanding what your hyperscaler, whether it's Azure or AWS, making sure you have the appropriate design there. But I think most of the time, what we're seeing, except for some of these, I think even the majority of 0 days, it's endpoints that are getting compromised that are then violating your security policies east-west, because it's not segmented, and it's not. I would say you don't have the granular access controls in place to stop that. So it's always. I think it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other when it comes to security. Different set of security risks that you have to look at a little bit differently. But when you look at how you manage security in your own data centers, whether it's multiple or singular, it's not much that different overall.
So that concludes all of our questions to date. I want to remind everyone, if as they leave today's session, there is a Zoom survey. And if you think of another question you would like to ask Christian or Praveen, there is space there for you to put that in, and I will get that to them and get your answers back to you. And so I want to thank Praveen and Christian from our premier sponsor, Citrix, today for joining us and for presenting to our members. Please keep in mind that we will be posting this on our YouTube New England Himss channel. So if you want to share it with any of your colleagues as well, after today's session, you may do that as well. So once again, I want to thank Christian and Praveen for joining us, and everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.